So there is still some people coming in just now. I think we'll just get started. But yes, we'll get started, and people can still come in anyway. I can't see anybody, but people are here. Well, it tells me people are here anyway. So before we start, I would just like to pay a brief tribute to Ian Waddell, who's meant to be the next speaker in our series of talks, but we sadly found out this week that he passed away, and it was a sudden shock to everybody, I think. And Ian was born in Glasgow, but is a resident of Canada from the age of 5. And Ian's contribution to his adopted country was phenomenal. Throughout his life, he'd campaigned with passion and energy for fairness and justice and the environment. And Canada has lost a great man, and we've lost a valuable member of the John Ray Society. So I'd just like to say that for Ian. But tonight we've got Tom Addyman that's going to be doing a talk for us. I've been very excited about this one now for a long time. I'm really excited to see some of the ideas and pictures and things that Tom's got for us. So I'll pass you over to Tom and let him get started.
Is that all clear on the screen there?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be speaking to the John Ray Society this evening. My initial apologies if I don't sound too relaxed as I start this. My server crashed about an hour ago and I had to reboot it all. So we're here now and it seems to be going very well. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm a buildings archaeologist. And I work with my colleagues at Simpson and Brown Architects, and I run Addyman Archaeology, as you can see on the screen. And in relation to the Hall of Clestrain, I've known the building for many years. I first visited about 20 years ago, and more recently we've been engaged by the John Ray Society to advise on taking the building forward to a new future. My own role as a buildings archaeologist is particularly the standing architecture, but you can't understand a building in isolation. So consideration of the wider site, the setting, and all of its various meanings is fundamentally important to a proper consideration of a great site like Clestrain. So I suppose one question is, it's a small building in a remote area. What is all the fuss about? Personally, for me, this is one of the most beautiful and exciting and stunning historic buildings I've ever had to have anything to do with. And so this talk really is about, why that is, why that should be the case, and what is of great interest about the building. Why is it worth celebrating? And I'll take you through a sort of initially some historical background and the setting, and then a tour of the building itself and all of the analytical information that has to be teased out. It's a monumental and complex jigsaw puzzle. It may be a small building, but there's so much to it, and the more that we examine it and explore it and undertake investigation, and the more that incredible things are sort of coming out almost sort of day by day. The study of the building builds on the work of many previous surveyors, previous assessment, the John Ray Society, the historical group of the John Ray Society, and many people who have been involved at lots of different levels over many years. So really this is building on that and suggesting some new discoveries and hopefully the way forward in guiding a very important conservation and repair scheme to bring this building back to life. Right. Now I'm trying to. Oh, here we go. So at the top of the farm track is this absolutely wonderful sign to the Hall of Clestrain farm. Most of you will know exactly where we are, but for those who don't, this is obviously the Orkney Islands, the top of the mainland, above the top of mainland Scotland. Orkney mainland, obviously Kirkwall and Stromness, the two principal towns, and Clestrain is located to the southwest of the Orkney mainland, overlooking Hoy and overlooking the great sound of Hoy here. This is a view looking westwards, looking down on, this is the hall itself. And the hall is located on a long ridge. So you have gently sloping ground down to the sea, but it rises up very slightly. And this is great sort of linear geological sort of formation, this crest. And you can just see how the hall perches on the high point of the crest. So it's absolutely spectacularly located for anybody who's been there. Oddly, whenever I go there, it's always glorious sunshine. And I'm told it's not always like that. But in my experience, it's absolutely bathed in sunshine whenever I go there. And this great sort of long linear thing is parallel to the sound of, this is Clestrain sound, and then looking out through the main sound of Hoy, which then returns. There's Hoy in the mist above Gremsey. I hope my pronunciation is okay, and the low-lying island in the foreground. So as we zoom in a little bit, you can see again, this is versus the long ridge and then the rising ground to the east of Clestrain. And Clestrain sort of sits on this ridge and has this axial view straight out westwards down the sound of Hoy, slightly to a northwest, Stromness, and then Gremsey in the near view with the backdrop of Hoy with its great mountains and terrain beyond. And there is something of a view down there, the sound of Hoy towards Scapa Flow, but you can see it. You've got a complete visual command of this great sea lane. As a place, Clestrain has a great great age to it. This long before the existing Hall of Clestrain. Here is, for example, Blau's Atlas in the mid-17th century. Clestrain very much marked as a place, a slightly larger place than the ones on either side, so clearly it had some significance even at that stage. And we know before the hall was built, there are other structures in the immediate landscape, and this is the old hall, or otherwise known as a storehouse, and this is quite close to the shore, near a sort of a landing beach, and it may look like an old barn when you first come up to it, but it's actually a very fine structure, and also in its own right well deserving of survey and analysis. So this is the predecessor structure of the Clestrain lands, and as you look at this, you can begin to see that actually it is a very finely built building. It's probably a late 17th century, mid to late 17th century structure. Maybe it's the same building that is shown on the Blow Atlas. There are peculiarities to it, so it's not just a barn. It's both very well built, but there are particular features. And so, as you go through the main entrance, here is one of those features, which is a drawbar socket, and the socket for a timber door, but held in place, semi-defensive by a stout sliding bar. So this hole goes back over a metre and a half into the wall. So it's a secure building. It's a secure laird's house, very austere, probably almost certainly a full two-storey building. The lower storey survives, the upper storey doesn't. And there are various windows and a fine fireplace at the end of one wall. And again, as you look more closely, there are fascinating features that still remain. It's remarkable to have such timber work still in place. Here is a blocked window, but the window frame is still intact. You can see the jointing, and again, here's another socket for a drawbar. So again, it's all about security and a moderate level of protection. Another window, fascinating details such as the great lintel here, which is a reused maritime timber. So if this is a mid-17th century building, this is an earlier ship that has been broken up and parts incorporated into the structure. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's just to flag it as something that's very, very significant. And again, here's another window. The frame has gone, but the bar socket can be clearly seen. From the 17th century, these lands were all under the ownership of the Honeyman family, who I think had married the Grahams of Grimsey. But for most of its existence, the estate landscape here owes its form to the Honeyman family, and Patrick Honeyman in the later 18th century was responsible for the construction of the Hall of Clestrain, and at the same time, and presumably the years following, a great landscape was laid out. And so the first aspect of this third quarter of the 18th century sort of set piece is the landscape that it sits in. It's an absolutely astonishing survival, and the Honeyman sort of lairds left Orkney almost permanently at the end of the 18th century, and really the lands, the great infrastructure was never developed. It never became was never reworked as a great country house. It just slumbered, and it has really slumbered for the 2 centuries since. And most of those mid and late 18th century landscape features are still absolutely intact. And so you can see here, for example, the great walled garden, and you begin to start seeing the regularity of the landscape. You can see the laird's house, the Honeyman's mansion, Hall of Clestrain, is wonderfully located, and a panoramic view of their island estate, Grimsey. This is the view effectively from the house itself, and again you can just see you're looking straight down the Sound of Hoy. You can see Stromness over to the right, and Hoy behind Grimsey there, and the Sound straight out. So in terms of being able to keep an eye on shipping and sea lanes, it's a perfect setting. As you walk back up the hill to the east, you start seeing this is the walled garden, parallel walls. It's a compartmented landscape. It's very regularly designed, carefully laid out. It's all about improvement of the land. So this is a great age of improvement. Planned settlements are appearing, so in Inverary, Tomentoul, places like that. But the agricultural landscape is also being taken in hand by these improving lairds. And this Clestrain is an absolutely outstanding example of one of these improvement period landscapes. You get a very, very good idea once you get higher up. So this is a Royal Commission image taken from presumably a small plane or a drone, and you can see immediately this is looking north, and you immediately see the core position of the house within this rectilinear landscape, and this northwards track and approach goes for something like a mile in that direction, and maybe half a mile from the south. So this is the south frontage, the walled garden with various terraces within, and further enclosures all laid out on a sort of grid pattern. As you approach the house from the south, you're bounded by a very broad sort of alley, sort of vista that frames the south frontage of the house. And I'm very happy this is the principal approach and the principal elevation, and the great walled garden wall framing it on one side. And you do wonder whether there had been an attempt at planting to try and frame this, whether that was successful or not. in the environment is open to debate. Here we are at the very centre in plan. So the house itself, the great walled garden, which is an enormous walled garden for quite a house that is fairly modest in scale. You can also see the house itself was part of a little ensemble with two parallel wings on either side. On the north side, closing a forecourt or a sort of yard area on the north side of the house. This is a close-up showing, zooming in, showing the extent of the walled garden. It's absolutely huge and very, very well built. It's basically sort of 2.5 to 3 meters high. These walls coped with great slabs and containing some internal features. So this seems to be a sort of a terrace of some sort, and you wonder what was being protected within here. Is it trees particularly, so as well as the garden areas? And you can see it's slightly down slope, so it's just tucked in behind the ridge. So that's a maximum area of protection. This falls out with the current project, but it's all part of the associated landscape. So as one approaches the hall itself on this great sort of south approach, as you come up, it sort of rises up, the ground sort of rises up, and clearly there's been some leveling and some ground formation. So it's a very carefully constructed composition, and that's what's left of one of the two wings. The other wing is just here as a ruined wall. But you can imagine this symmetrical composition with this great frontage to welcome you with the sweeping staircase up to the front entrance. Here's another, it's a high level view, and again it makes the point very clearly that you're at the centre of the axes, this sort of great east axis tumbling down the hillside, framing the house. Again, the house is framed on all sides. It's absolutely superb, and there's the wing. And again, that's the close-up of the plan, which I'll talk more about. The wing itself has had a very checkered history. You can see those sort of much more recent modern sliding doors at one end. It's been maintained for farming use, but has been reworked and remodeled. I'll show you some earlier images showing these wings. So it's had quite a history in its own right. If you go inside, there's actually quite a lot of surviving archaeology. So this all relates. These are windows and an entrance looking onto the courtyard on the north side of the house. You've even got sort of plastered walls surviving, and evidence for internal partitions. And so this is a building that certainly deserves careful study. And clearly it's not just a farm shed in its original form. It may have been a dairy or ancillary storage or accommodation. So not just a farm building. So my colleague John Saunders has been very busy sort of trying to visualize how this great sort of landscape may have looked in its heyday, or as intended. That was the building we were just looking at. Obviously the hall there, the parallel range that we know existed. Early maps showing other structures such as a ducat at this point and another agricultural building. This is a preliminary idea. Again, beyond you can see the great walled garden with some planting within. And again, as this project progresses and the study continues of the landscape, this visualization, this idea of how it all worked may evolve and change. So it's a preliminary study. This is looking at the hall again from the other direction, so slightly from the southeast. Great sort of entrance approach and access as restored, and I'll get into the details of the house later on, and the ancillary buildings and so on. And then this access sort of running off to the north as well. And this routeway can be sort of followed for a long way through the landscape. There are some bridges and gates and so on the same alignment, going for a mile and a half northwards. So the building itself, the hall, it's again, you wouldn't get too excised about it when you first came to it. You know, I think when I first saw it, I thought, well, what's all the fuss about? It seems to be a fairly simple building. It's lovely. It's got classical details, and then you start looking at it, and the more you sort of look, the sort of sheer quality of its construction slowly sort of reveals itself. So in terms of how the building has been studied, the John Ray Society Historical Group and others have appealed for early images and other historic images that are known, and so this group of early 20th century photographic images that show the building in a much more complete state than it was at that point. And you can see here, more or less as it is now, with an asbestos roof, much patched. It's derelict. The stones the steps are in decay, and there are all sorts of structural issues. The building was abandoned following a gale in the 1950s, the early 1950s. It had been the farmhouse of the Craigie family, and following the gale and the huge amount of damage that was done, particularly to the roof, it was decided that it was untenable to live in this building. And so really for the last 70 years or more, it has remained empty, maintained, but increasingly sort of derelict, and in the state we know it today. But as you go back before the vacation before the family left, a few very precious individual photographs showing a building in greater repair. So you've still got the stone slates on the roof, and you can see here the two wings. So that's the existing one just off, and this is the one that only partly survives now. But these are very important details to actually sort of pick up, and you can see the rather like the inside of that one. You can see there are a whole series of windows and entrances in this range. So again, it's less of an agricultural building and more of ancillary accommodation and workshops and that sort of thing. And you can also, if you remember the front staircase here, in a good state of repair. These are great stone balusters, and we'll come back to those balustrades. So in terms of formal study of the building, really it's been sleeping for a long time, and it wasn't really until the late 1990s, as far as I'm aware, the first formal survey was done. This is by the Royal Commission, typically beautiful bit of recording work, and they've done a whole suit, the three principal plans, a principal elevation, and a very helpful cross-section through the building. An absolutely wonderful bit of individual recording. As you look at the principal frontage, you can begin to sort of start picking out, particularly as the light, the sun sort of moves around the building, casting shadows on the upstanding features, the projecting features, and you begin to see actually this is a very fine piece of architecture indeed. It certainly looks a bit odd. I mean, it's stumpy, and there has long been speculation that it may have lost a more developed sort of frontage, possibly a great sort of pediment sitting on top, rising from these little setbacks here. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment or two. But again, you can just see these lovely margins, and absolutely designed to catch the light and to make the building appear more stately than its scale would necessarily lead you to imagine. And as soon as you get closer, up to it. There are very quirky details like this sort of over door window. You get to the entrance itself, the wonderful subtle details of the lugged sort of ears at the top of the entrance. Wonderful subtleties. The staircase itself, it's long been realised that these stone side walls are not the original. You can just see the top plat of the stair there. It's actually been trimmed off, but the steps themselves are a very fine sort of mid to late 18th century sort of composition, sweeping down iron balustrades originally to terminate at this wonderful detail. And again, I get very enthusiastic about these absolutely beautiful little details, and you can actually see the lead set stump of the iron sort of newel at the end of the stair coming sweeping down. So you can actually imagine something absolutely beautiful there. I can imagine wrought iron in the salt environment would not be a great idea, so it may not have lasted too long, and was replaced by the stone wall. So there's been some initial investigation around the immediate exterior of the hall. This work is being taken forward. This is preliminary investigations to try and understand some basic facts about the architecture, and particularly the levels and the details around the exterior foot of the main building. And this is being led by Paul Johnson, who's the John Race Society's archaeologist, with a team of very willing and enthusiastic volunteers who are willing to come out in all weathers and dig away and examine the site. This is their finds cabin, and so there's quite increasingly so well set up as an ongoing archaeological exercise. And so there's been preliminary test trenching around. This is one thing that was revealed, this great sort of plat by the back door, beautifully laid flagstones. And there it is in the record photography. And so really it's establishing some basic facts about the level of a courtyard, because that may influence the design of what may follow when the hall is being restored. There's also this extraordinary feature known as the moat that goes around the exterior perimeter of the building. So that's the staircase on the south side, and it drops down a good 1.82 meters and runs all the way around the side of the building, and a later wall to stopping people falling into this great ditch surrounding the entire building. So it's open on three sides, and then on the fourth side, the north side, the rear side, it sort of goes into this sort of tunnel entrance. And so one of the focuses is how did this moat, this sunken area, work, and where did that particular entrance lead to? And so this has led to some of the initial sort of recording exercises. So a very lovely drawing here by Paul and his team, and showing this area here, showing the entrance to the drain, but they then discovered the top of. So that's just on the other side of that wall. We were just looking, and excavation has revealed capstones over the drain, and it seems to be running straight underneath that plat. So in mid-Georgian architecture, this is a very typical feature, and it's basically keeping the footprint of the building dry by cutting a drain below floor level, surrounding the entire perimeter. Quite a lot of interesting finds have been made, ceramics and glass, anal bones and so on, as this work has progressed. And so all of that is being carefully sorted and curated, and led by Gail Trinkle, who is the archaeology curator at Orkney Museums. So quite a collection is building up, relating to the domestic life, particularly of the house in its earlier period. both the honeymoon period and the Ray family and later. Looking into the drain, one of the capstones was lifted, so that's the plat by the back door, and the first capstone was lifted, and you can see that absolutely beautifully formed channel at the bottom. And then I don't know who they sent down into the drain, but here is the interior of it as it sort of runs around the side of the perimeter of the building, wonderfully built. And then these are some of the records, the field drawings of that, and in the process, sorry it's a bit faint, but in the process of being digitized to turn into a full and formal record of the excavation. So another area that has been examined is this wing, which no longer survives other than the back wall. So it only stands about a metre high now. Was demolished in the 20th century, and part of the testing of the areas is to see what survives of this, possibly as a footprint of a proposed new building. Clearly, to understand what may survive is an important aspect of what could be done on that site. And so Paul and his team have excavated just one sample area corresponding to a blocked entrance. And there's historic paving with later cement agricultural usage, later surfaces on top of the early surfaces, and then here in the foreground is the front wall. And so these are all important sort of fixed points in the immediate landscape of the hall. We know precisely, we've got measurements exactly on where this wing existed, and if it were reconstructed, we know precisely where to put it. So these wonderful archaeological investigations have hit the press in various different ways and have a great profile. John Ray Society is particularly good at public outreach and linking in with other organisations in the Orkneys and further afield, doing sort of, young archaeologists on site there. I think that's possibly the president inspecting the excavation. So the building itself, the wall itself, this is a wonderful early photograph, and our process is to try and understand what can be understood about the architecture of the building in as much detail as possible, so as to advise the conservation effort and the repairs going forward. And we're trying to do it in a scholarly way and to learn whatever can be learnt about the history, the archaeology, the former appearance of the building. And so we're looking for any source of information really. So starting with the historic records, here I'm beginning to look at how it is meant to be seen externally. And I put this image on because you can see some of the architectures of stepping out these courses, the windows, but there's a lot of white in between. And as might be expected on most 18th century buildings, there are traces of thrown lime hull. So this was a traditional finish. It's a very tough sort of weather finish, and usually was lime washed on top. So it's a mixture of sloppy sand and lime that was thrown at the wall to create an even surface. And you can see here some you can see residues all over the place, and the more you look, the more you will end up seeing. And you can see here there's a raised margin, so this is where the polite architecture of the facade was defined. And then round the back, they weren't so worried about it, and so the lime went over it, went over all the dressed stones at the corner. So this is the corner of the main frontage, and again you can see what I was talking about before, the light catching the very subtle raised margins, and then the lime running up to the raised margins. And so all of this dressed stone was meant to be exposed, and it was only the rubble stone that was covered in the lime. All of this is very important because this may be what gets how the building is reinstated using this evidence. Here's a close-up, and again you can just see how the lime so beautifully stops in relation to the ashlar of the main angles of the building. all of these windows on the back are defined by raised margins as well. And there was very clearly a way of building inexpensively. So the rubble was inexpensive, using the expensive stone and covering everything else over with the lime to, and sometimes you would put a smart finish on it. So this is very typical, and I'll show you an example of another building in Argyll that we're working on currently, where you have very, very similar evidence, and you've got some dressed stones on the corners and the principal features, but the rest of it is sort of rubble built. And you can see here a lot of the lime still surviving on the side. And so the fine features, particularly on the front, less fine around the side and the back. So this is, to make a point, this is before and after. So this is before the state of the building, before conservation work. And to give an idea of how Clestrain may have looked, this is a newly reinstated lime hull finish that has been sort of thrown on, and it's been lime washed as well. And again, you can just immediately see how the architectural features sort of leap out. So this is a canvas on which the fine architecture can be read. And again, that's very much the impact I'm sure the exterior of Clestrain would have had on a smaller scale, but that's absolutely the same idea. So it's quite shocking when you see that sort of thing. Other evidence of the exterior, the early views show the Orkney stone sort of flagged roof, stone tiles, and some of the tiles have been recovered around the site. You can see the sort of chipped edge, and they go up in diminishing courses, which is again a traditional sort of Scots detail. And even around the site there are sort of ridge stones, possibly from this ridge or one of the two ranges on either side. And again, you've got you just need one or two of these to confirm the detail, and it's that sort of thing that then can be used to guide the restoration. So there have been various visualizations of how the building may have looked in its various heydays. This must be early 19th century, early to mid 19th century, based on the attire. And really the building as it is today, but before it started decaying. And again, you can see the lime here has been reinstated on the front, and the dress stone leaps out and defines all the features. The lugs are very clearly visible in the corners above the window and so on. Very nice visualization, like the sheep particularly. But as we've been working on this, various, and I'll get into the evidence, but various pieces of evidence have suggested that in its heyday, when it was first built in the late 18th century, 1760s, this was not the intended form, and probably, almost certainly, it had been built with a great centerpiece of some sort. The architecture suggests a great pediment like this, a long, low sort of pediment. Almost certainly there had been a window in the middle here, and the evidence from inside suggests there had been a window in the upper level. And so again, these details are developing as the project has developed, but this may be an idea of what you saw as you came up this great southern approach, a very symmetrical arrangement, and it's partly based on the historical evidence that suggests there had been a pediment, and partly on the archaeological evidence, and partly comparing it to other buildings. And so here are some other buildings. There's Clestrain at the top there. These are two slightly larger. Clestrain is a very modest 3 bays wide under a pediment. This is essentially the same thing, but with 2 extra bays. This is Blackburn House in West Lothian, and again with lime finishes reinstated. So this is a newly conserved, very, very fine set piece. And again, you've got some wings and a similar sort of arrangement framing the main house. This is Gayfield House in Edinburgh, and again, not much larger than Clestrain, but this is what we've based the reconstruction of that pediment detail on, particularly the pitch, which is all important. If you get that wrong, the building will look very strange. and again, a similar sort of pitch at Blackburn. So those are the sort of precedents that we're looking at. And so you have a very smart classical architecture that has been imported at no small expense to the Orkneys, and an extraordinary site it must have been when first built. And again, this is I think this is current thinking with the wings. So there has been a fair bit of historical research. Fiona Gould, who's one of the John Ray Society trustees, has been working with a local group and ploughing through and collating and gathering documents, also working with Orkney archives. And one absolutely key bit of information is this amazing, it's basically an assessment of the all the building materials and all of the constructional details of the Hall of Clestrain. It's an inventory of everything that was spent on the building. This was done for legal purposes. It says, you can see here, an account of the measure of Patrick Honeyman of Grimsey Esquire, his new house at Clestrain. And this is 1769, and so presumably in the 2 or 3 years beforehand the house was being built. But this is an assessment of what was spent on it, and the detail is extraordinary. This is an absolutely crucial document. You can see, for example, so ground floor, so ground is the lower level, to 7 sash windows, 8 per foot square, to you can read it, glazing details, mullions, doors, and everything is specified, including the length, the size, the scale, the weight, and how much it all cost. So these are the details. So Fiona particularly has been transcribing this amazing document, which goes to 3 or 4 pages in length. And this is part of her transcription. I hope she'll forgive me for putting this up. But you can see here, much easier to read, obviously, the laughing above the kitchen, ditto in the passage, doors for the press for the clothes, double work, the book and paper press. The amount of detail, room by room, is extraordinary, and it's matching this up to the surviving evidence, is allowing an incredibly detailed understanding of how this building was first built. And we know that the Honeymans left in the late 18th century, and this became the Thactors' house. So the Ray family were one of those family of Thactors occupying it, and very little was ever done to the building subsequently. And so the evidence tallies with this, the evidence of the building tallies with this incredibly closely. And so what I'm going to do now is take you on a tour of the house from the bottom up. And we'll start off obviously with what they're calling the ground floor, the basement floor. And this just makes the point that every single room is named: lobby, the passage, the midroom, the milk house, the parlour, the kitchen, the clothes press, and so on. Yes, the centre of the kitchen, lintels for the fireplace, and so on. Everything is quantified. So this is back to that Royal Commission survey. And you can see here that the lower level, so this is the ground level, it's quite low ceilinged, and so this is very much the service area. This is where Paul had discovered that stone plat at the back entrance, fairly low ceilinged, and today there's not very little left of those various interiors that are named in the inventory. You can also see the first floor is very high ceilinged, and these are the principal rooms, reception rooms, and then a bedroom loft level above, possibly some space up in the up above the collar beam, also utilised. That's a matter of debate. This is the commission plan, so showing the very regular, almost square plan of the building. There's a chamber under the stairs which may have a well within it, it's still rubble filled, so that's something to be investigated. But all of these subdivisions are actually 20th century. And as you can see, they are, I think these are pig pens, livestock. And so the whole bottom of the house was stripped out and converted into a shelter and sort of management area for livestock. The walls were plastered in cement and the ceilings stripped out. The floor was concreted, and so there's very, very little evidence as to what the original arrangement was visible at the moment. Here's another image, and you can just start beginning to see the state of the building as well. So when a lot of this cement comes out, when these are removed, when the floor is taken up, we are very hopeful that there'll be some fantastic evidence for what appears in that inventory, and we can match up the individual areas. What we can see of the ceiling, for example, some details are absolutely wonderful. These are the carpentry details of sawn and adze, the lath nails to the plaster ceiling, evidence for partitions, sockets and joints and so on. So clearly there's a lot that can be learned about this space. And so even if it's not restored or reinstated, it will be absolutely fascinating to know what the arrangement had been. So I suspect there'll be a lot of evidence to be revealed, but not at this stage. In one corner, I'll just give that. So one corner of the basement, you have the stair, very finely built stair that rises up to, well, or descends from the principal level down to the service areas where the kitchens and all the other service arrangements were. This is an extremely fine pen check, basically cantilevered. All of these are, each one supports the next one, and they're sort of socketed into the wall. And so it's a self-supporting stair built on sort of mathematical principles, and it's a very, very fine feature, very sort of Edinburgh Newtown, or wonderfully sort of Georgian. That comes up to the principal level. So here's the entrance of the great staircase at the front, and you can immediately see, rather than lots of small rooms, you've got a few where you have an entrance hall coming in, and probably the principal drawing room or chamber. Maybe this is the dining room just opposite the head of the stairs, and whether that's a withdrawing room or a principal bedroom even on the main floor, with a closet off it, with a little corner fireplace. And so in terms of the plan, a lot of the evidence was clear, and certainly the inventory allows naming of a lot of these spaces. So here we are. This is the main entrance. You just come in. This is the stair going up to the first, second floor. Absolutely beautiful again, and it's a much taller space, and so the stair is the steps are taller, and you can see the sort of state of it. Most of the walls are green from decades and decades of saturation and salt ingress and the Orkney climate. So in some ways it's amazing the building is still standing, but the building is absolutely saturated. A lot of the timber, particularly where they meet the walls, have rotted, and so there are stability issues. But again, once you start looking, you can see all sorts of things like internal wall plaster. Here's a lovely fireplace with a beautiful sort of basket arch detail visible, later packed in with cement. There's another fireplace. So these are all lovely features, and you can imagine a sort of timber panelled surround framing the stone. And as you look through, there are all sorts of strange details. These are lintels, in some of the windows may have these marks on. These are cut by a little blade called a race knife. And these are almost certainly merchants' marks from the importation of this timber, which is conifer, and likely comes from the Baltic or Scandinavia, and particularly given Orkney's geographical position, that's the whole of the east coast of Scotland and up into the Orkneys and Shetlands and the western seaboard as well. There was a huge trade in imported timber. So this is almost certainly that sort of exotic timber coming in from the east. But these details on the side suggest that this is itself a reused timber, so this has come from somewhere else. These mouldings don't relate to the window, it's just a bit of timber that's been chopped up. So there's a question as to where this may have come from. Could it have been from the earlier Hall of Clestrain down on the shore? Or with this fine detail, it's not going to be a vernacular building, it'll be quite a interesting building. So all of this evidence sort of raises questions. As you go around the principal level, there are some surviving partitions, interesting sort of lap and plaster, and then very fine deal boards lining. So these are it's a finely appointed interior from what survives. A huge amount of quite subtle evidence in some corners. Paneling actually still remains intact, and there's just enough of every type of detail to get a fair idea of the individual rooms and how they were fitted out. And so you've got a nice raised and fielded panel here. This is the top of the door. You've still got the mouldings, one or two of every single detail. Still sort of data rail detail, and again you can see where it's been pulled off. You've got the profile of the moulding, and so that's enough evidence to actually reinstate that timber. So it's just here. Skirting, one bit of skirting still survives with a moulded top, and beautiful sort of rich mid-18th century detailing, and even the yellow paintwork still survives, and it looks like it has never been overpainted, which is remarkable. I think that's an 18th century paint scheme, confirmed by some evidence elsewhere. So this is looking up at the soffit board of the window, and again beautiful fielded panels and the very fresh yellow paintwork for that particular room. There are bits and pieces sort of lying around, and we're looking at all sorts of evidence, and every sort of individual timber can be precious. Here we have one which has a very sort of wonderful, freshly, very, very crisp profile. This is above, we've relocated it to that position there. So this is actually within a little vestibule. So that's the hall. You came into a vestibule to then go into the next rooms. And this is a cornice, a timber cornice that came from that position there. It's the only surviving one, but it's enough to say, right, okay, you can reinstate that detail in that room very, very reliably. Here's a close-up of that, so you can see the profile of the returning part of the cornice. And these incredible sort of Georgian, this has been sort of contoured to fit as the next timber would fit onto here. It's just shows the absolute quality of the joinery. It's all imported pine. Where a lot of these features have been taken out, because the original floors are still in position, you can actually see a great deal of evidence on the floors. And so here you can see sockets, mortises cut in for partitions that have since gone. So this is the vestibule that we were just looking at. So those walls survive. We're looking at the evidence for this wall here in the floor at that point, looking the other direction. And so there's a floor, and you can see here an entrance. These are studs going all the way along, and I think there's another entrance on that side. This evidence is again subtle, but it's absolutely wonderful, and a lot of pigeon guano had to be cleaned off to find all these things. So this will need to be recorded in great detail, and it will provide a complete plan of the first floor level, confirming. Well, this is a lot of the evidence has been gone into here, but we know additional details, such as there was a closed vestibule with an entrance at that point, and I think there was probably a door in here. But just the survival of what still remains and the evidence for what doesn't is extraordinary. Again, we know that further details that there were entrances here and here. As you go around the building, you're aware that there's debris and things piled up in corners. And actually, this is a complete glory hole of bits of timber work particularly that has been stripped out of the building. You can see immediately there's early looking paint still surviving on pieces. And so actually there's an enormous amount to be gathered together. And as you wander around the surrounding buildings, up in the roof spaces, there are further timbers. That's on the side of a stair framing member, and there are various other early, mixed with later stuff. But there's a huge jigsaw puzzle and sorting exercise. Some of the ones that we took out again reveal the astonishing paint colours. So you have the lovely yellow. This is a very deep ultramarine sort of blue, and this is a sort of arsenic green. A lot of the interior paint scheme of the building still survives in these pieces, and so even if it's only an academic exercise, the interiors can be reconstructed with a huge amount of detail and more joinery detail. So this is framing that has been taken out from upstairs and has been used in the pig pens below, just together. And so there are bits and pieces everywhere. And so this is actually a framing member with jointing still surviving. You can see the profile of the moulding and a reddish paint scheme on that one. So what does this all mean? I'm just putting together a few slides of recreated interiors of the same period, just to give an impression. This is very much how that particular floor level of Clestrain would have looked. Most of the interiors were panelled. This is Gunn's Greenhouse, which is a building for the 1750s in Weymouth, where some of the mid-18th century rooms have been restored. Much of this survived, but the paint scheme, a huge amount of paint analysis was done, and a colour scheme appropriate to the period and furnishing were installed. So this will give you an impression of how the sort of interiors Gunn's Green may have had, Clestrain may have had. This is a Gladstone's land, so the building's earlier, but it has an 18th century addition to it, and that has been recreated. But panelling and the press in the corner are okay. I think various other parts have been restored, but again using increasingly shocking. So these following photographs will hopefully not worry you too much. But this is timber painted to look like an expensive marble. Olive greens were a very typical colour, but you do start getting some very bright colours. This is colonial Williamsburg, and so interiors of the 1760s and early 1770s have been sort of reconstructed there, and a huge amount of, again, the paint research to get these colours correct. And again, they're quite sort of garish and shocking, some less so, but and that's very similar to the Clestrain yellow that we saw. And there's an arsenic green interior, a dining room in this case, painted floor carpets, plaster ceilings, timber cornices, and absolutely the same period and very much the same appearance as at Clestrain. And again, it's increasingly shocking sort of paper. Some wallpapers, fine joinery, framing the fireplace, exactly the same sort of fireplace as at Clestrain. So just to give an impression of how it may have looked when first built. So moving on, the staircase. This is going up to the upper level, the bedroom level, and to show you that there are still surviving metalwork details as well. So this is the balustrade. Which looks like sort of tubular steel, badly rusted, but actually it's an 18th century wrought iron handrail with the original sort of balusters and with these wonderful sort of curly details, all hand wrought in iron. And going through the various piles, there's actually much of this staircase balustrade still survives. You can just see how sort of beautifully wrought these details are, and there are other details from elsewhere. So there's a huge amount of, again, very sort of subtle evidence and that can be drawn upon to at least understand how this building originally looked. So I'm coming back to this cross section. We're just going up to the bedroom level here, and showing you the roof cross section. It's a very broad span. It's something like 8 or 9 meters. So it's a very, very broad roof, but with single rafters and held in place by these collar beams. And it's an absolute a spectacle to behold. It's absolutely superb. Superb bit of carpentry construction. It's an incredibly exciting roof structure to see as an archaeologist. You can see, well, it's a pine roof, and there are all sorts of joinery details. And this particular framing at the wallhead, it smacks of something earlier than the mid-18th century. It's very much a sort of 17th or even 16th century type of construction. You see these in tower houses and earlier laird's houses very regularly. And so this is a much older type of framing technique that has been employed on a very up-to-date building. So it's an interesting combination of vernacular and the latest building practices. So this is very much the vernacular tradition. And as you still get in, you can just see that these are called sole pieces, and they hold ashlar pieces. So it sort of clamps the top of the wall. The whole thing is held in place with stout pegs. Basically, sort of late medieval type of carpentry that is still very much alive and well in the 18th century. Here we are. You can see the collar beams sort of lapped and pegged at the apex as well. There are assembly marks. So these are sort of framing marks for each frame was assembled, was carpented off-site, brought possibly on boats to the building site itself, and then reassembled. And these assembly marks allow you to put the pieces back together. They were laid out in the wood yard to begin with when being made, and then dismantled like an IKEA kit, and then reassembled on site. They're not in numerical order, which might suggest the roof has had a checkered history, or possibly it didn't matter that they went in numerical order during construction. So various theories, and again, this is just flagging that there are wonderful details like this to be recorded and to be looked at more systematically. There are further odd marks. I think that's possibly an assembly mark, but this is very much one of the merchant's marks, possibly done in one of the Baltic ports. And this is timber management in the merchant's yard, a long way from the Orkneys. So it's an extraordinary structure. So this is the north side of the roof, which has all of these intact details. I'll come back to that. As you go up into the roof structure itself, you can see lots of details. These are lath nails for plastered ceilings. And there are also other framing elements. So these are studs for framed partitions. And so these are for the rooms that had existed upstairs. There was a lot of evidence for that, but quite subtle again. But the entire plan can be reconstructed from these very ephemeral details. And so the Royal Commission saw these, and that was why we were looking at that timber for that partition. And these are the various rooms. The rooms you can see quite clearly relate to the fireplaces. So there's one large room here with the fireplace, another room with a fireplace, a third one. And then very interestingly, there's this opening here, which is above the south frontage, where the pediment probably was, and this probably relates to the window, the circular window in the pediment. And so there's evidence in the roof space for that. There are some areas of the lath and plaster still surviving with the pale blue paint scheme for the first room at the top of the stairs. And this is the south side where the pediment had been, and the framing is different. So you've got the at one end, at each end, you've got the framing matching the other side, but in the middle bit where the pediment was, the masonry probably rose up here, and so these are of a different detail. So that is quite good evidence for what has gone. And then you can see the framing here for a sort of small roof, a timpani roof, riding to the back of the pediment, and the window would have been in the middle here. And there is slight reference in that wonderful inventory to the tympanum in the garret, which must be referring to this. And so again, there are 3 or 4 bits of evidence to support this great pedimented frontage, which we know almost certainly blew down at the end of the 18th century during a gale. So it was only in existence for 20 years and collapsed because of the storm damage. This is one of these upstairs bedrooms, a very nice fireplace surviving, and a lot of additional details, the wall plasters and so on. Again, for an interior that may have looked rather like this. So this was the larger bedroom, very typical box bed arrangement, panelled walls over wall panelling over the plaster, curtains on the box bed. So this is one recreated. It's very much the sort of bedroom you might imagine. Slightly lesser status. Here's another box bed. This was in a building we worked on a couple of years ago, and a wonderful surviving detail, but plastered inside. So a simpler bed frame is gone, but you can see the whole thing very much like at Clestrain, was partitioned and plastered onto lath, and wonderful contemporary colours as well. So to give you an idea of what that upper level might have looked like. So, drawing towards the end of the talk, we have a fair degree of confidence as to the details of this. So that was the pediment with the window behind, and a little timpani roof connecting to the main roof behind the pediment. The 2 wings on either side. And again, this has evolved various iterations of this drawing to give a fair idea. And there's still, the proposal is to reinstate this in the moment. So where do we go from here? There have already been some detailed survey exercises on the house. You saw the Royal Commission one. More recently, the John Ray Society commissioned a laser scan of the hall and its immediate setting and its interiors. And so this is a fantastic initial stage of a detailed survey record that this building absolutely deserves. And this gives fantastic 3-dimensional control. So all of these are individual dots that are colorized. It's a point cloud image, so it's a 3-dimensional image, but you can rotate and examine. You can see this on the internet through various links, and so it's a fly through. So it's very useful on some levels to visualize the site, and there's a record of the state of the site and for control for survey. But as you zoom in, the detail pixelates, and so the next stage would be to do a more detailed survey. And the current way of doing it is through modelled photography. And so you would employ various things. So this is another site, Craigievar Castle, where a drone was employed to take high resolution digital photography all around the outside of the building. And at Clestrain, it would be inside as well, to generate a model, which is an incredibly accurate way of doing it. And here's another, this is a building we were working on near Inverness called Fairburn Tower. So these images are obviously photographic images, but they're modelled photography. So it's 3-dimensional photography built up from multiple images that are sort of cross-lapped and merged together in a computer. And then you can print out very, very high resolution, accurate 2-dimensional elevation drawings, elevation images like this, which you then simply trace. And so because the detail is so good, you can do every stone if you wanted to. And on top of that, this is an archaeological drawing where we're layering on the different phases. You can see where windows have been expanded and later patching and so on. It's exactly the sort of record we'd love to see at Clestrain. Again, so rich as the detail, it well deserves it. And as you get inside, the detail becomes more complex. This is obviously a masonry building, Clestrain will have a huge amount of joinery detail as well. And so there's a huge, there's a quite an elaborate process that needs to go forward. There's also the careful identification of all of the loose bits of building materials, particularly timber. There's paint analysis which could be done on that, and a huge jigsaw puzzle trying to work out where all these bits and pieces came from originally, and a massive wealth of evidence. This will all feed into the conservation approach to the building and the reuse, which isn't necessary in all respects. It doesn't need to be entirely devoted to the following the evidence. But again, as part of the conservation planning process, it's important to know about the evidence and to know what can be learned of the building before making decisions about what to do with it. Again, this is a part of the feasibility study, and it's an in progress part of the design process of working out what could possibly be done with this incredibly sensitive site. Here, for example, is a modern structure on the site of the east wing, but precisely mirroring its form. So very much recreating the scale and the setting for the north frontage of the building. It doesn't exclude putting on contemporary additions. So it's very much a balance of evidence and modern requirements and good design. So here are 3 shots of the different levels showing the building. Most of the features of the basement level have gone, and there's no particular reason to reinstate a historically authentic interior. Very certainly there's more of the feeling that should be done on the principal level, where the evidence is much clearer and a lot of it still survives. And again, up in the loft space, maybe there's some reinstatement, but maybe there's a more contemporary way of using that space. So really, it's a balance, and you feed all of this information in, and hopefully come out with a stunning new building, taking all the best of the old building. So John Ray Society has been absolutely brilliant in promoting this project, and it's been a long struggle, and so many people have been involved. As far as the archaeology and history go, I'll point you towards this publication by John Ray Society by Fiona, which is an historical account of the building and the family. A very, very useful handbook, so I'd urge all viewers to purchase this from the Society. And just to really finish up on, again, the Society has a wonderful presence on the web through their website and all the various links. And again, I'm sure you'll have seen it, but absolutely explore. There are so many aspects to this. I've barely even touched upon John Ray himself. I think at that point I should finish and say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. I don't know about anybody else, but I had to reach for my notepad to start taking notes because there's so much detail to the whole thing. It's unbelievable. When you see the building as it is, a lot of people will just see it as an old dilapidated building, but once you start picking out these details, it really becomes so in depth, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
So I'd like to invite anybody that's got questions to type it into the chat box. There's a chat box along the bar where you can stop your video and things. So hopefully people will manage to find that okay. I've just got a quick question for a start. It's just more to settle curiosity, but where was that picture of the box bed taken?
that was that same building in Argyll that we're repairing, that had the frontage redone.
Okay.
It's between Inverary and Loch Gilphead.
It's very inviting. There's always something very inviting about a box bed where you could just go in and close the curtains.
Yes, it's such a lovely space.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm told very, very often the bases of the beds were crossed ropes or strung with ropes to support the mattress.
Okay.
Sometimes you find the evidence for the the stringers supporting the ropes.
Right, okay. That's interesting. Tom, can you get access to the chat? Can you see it?
Oh, no, I can't. Sorry.
There's a couple of questions popped up on it.
Chat. What would the original architect or designer have been? Would they have been local to Orkney or brought in from elsewhere? I think we don't know who it would have been. It's a very good question. Certainly they would have been trained somewhere like Edinburgh, working with established architects. Sometimes an architect would be approached to produce drawings, and sometimes they didn't even come to site, and so a scheme could have been sent up to Orkney, a design that was then executed by local, highly skilled local builders, which again, you use as local a building team as possible. For that house in Eyemouth, Guns Green, it's very clear that John Adam designed the building and oversaw the exterior shell of it, but the interior was fitted out by the Nisbet family. And if you ever go there, it's well worth seeing, not only because it's an interesting comparison for Clestrain, but also they were a family of pirates and smugglers. And so the Adam building team built the shell and started fitting it out, and then were sent away. And the local people then came back in and started unpicking it in order to build secret compartments everywhere. And so that's a case where two separate building teams worked on the same building. There are very extraordinary sort of things for concealing tea built into the floor structures and things like that. But again, I'm sure it's partly vernacular, that roof structure, and certainly must draw upon the local traditions that were still very much alive up in the north. You wouldn't build a roof like that in Edinburgh, for example, in the mid-18th century. Why did the pediment fall down? I think it was a gale in the early 1790s. It's I think a documentary reference, and Fiona can sort of correct me on this, suggested that the roof came down, but clearly the roof didn't come down. It's still mostly intact. It probably was a huge rate blast of the gale hitting that upstanding bit of masonry, the pediment, full on, and destabilizing it, and it collapsed. So I think that's certainly there are no records that show it in place later on. Yes, I think there'll be a structural engineer involved to ensure that a reinstated pediment wouldn't fall down. Let's have a look. What were the iron bits on the front of the house? Looks like some of them were gutter brackets, yes. The one that's much longer, I don't remember what the longer one is, but certainly the iron gutters were, I think they are later features. I think they're later features. I mean, certainly the ones that are there are sort of later cast iron gutters. I'm not sure what the original detail would have been. And that's a sort of detail that's really important, obviously, for the conservation of the building. If you're reinstating something that appears and functions, at least on the exterior, like an 18th century house. Is there any scope for kendo work on the timber? I think that means dendro work on the timber, yeah. To help identify the dating and origin of the timber. Yes, I think there is very good potential. Pine obviously grows faster. Baltic pine can be very slow grown, and so the question is, do you have enough rings to get a decent date from it? And so if it's still slow grown Scandinavian timber, then possibly yes. And I think it would be a very, very interesting study to do. And you can also, you put in all the results into a huge database that gives all the regional variations. And so you can identify which area of the Baltic or Scandinavia it came from, and demonstrate it. It wasn't native timber, which it almost certainly wasn't at that stage, because there were very few woods that would support it. Yes, dendro, not kendo, it says. The photographs of the setting show the significance of the siting and landscape. The building, beautiful in profile. The previous talk at the end had questions from some folk about a parking area and sustaining the aesthetics of Clestrain. Comments. Well, I'm not privy to the most sort of current discussions on this, but my understanding is that the car parking will, as far as possibly can be sort of tucked away off the principal axes. And I think that's a discussion still in progress, but absolutely parking is a blight on many sort of historic sites and has to be very, very carefully considered. I think, unless I'm wrong, that the current idea is that cars will approach from the east down that axis, down the hill, park off on the north side of that a fair bit before getting to the hall. So hopefully kept away from the core of the site at least. What are your thoughts about restoring the outside staircase? Now that's an interesting dilemma, because the stone balusters, balustrades, are clearly of some age. I guess they would be early to mid 19th century, possibly even earlier. The wrought iron handrail obviously didn't last very long in that environment. You could certainly produce a wrought iron alternative to the stone these days in a material that would be weather resistant. So it doesn't have to be sort of iron necessarily. So it could be reinstated. I think the question is, should you or should you keep what is there? That's a little bit of a conservation debate. I'm going to slightly pass the buck by saying we need to study the building a little bit more to really get the thinking about the philosophy of the restoration well understood. But certainly if you're reinstating the pediment and reinstating the exterior appearance, I mean, that's restoration. It certainly raises the question to leave the balustrades like that. Is that inconsistent if you're putting the pediment back? Certainly it would look absolutely beautiful with the wrought iron handrails. So I'll not commit myself further than that. How are we doing? I think, is that all the questions?
I think there's one more just appeared there.
Oh yes,
Charlie.
With the other pediment precedents, were there valley constructions behind the pediment, or does it act as a parapet? I think because you have the evidence for the window, which is in the roof structure, so that there's a sort of bridle beam and enough room to actually sort of physically go in behind the pediment. I think the idea that there was a circular window, or at least a window, I'm sure is correct, which would mean that there wasn't a parapet. There must have been a little timpani roof running to the back of the pediment. And so, yes, there would have been valleys on either side going down to the angles of the building. And I think that probably is confirmed by the phrase in the inventory, the timpani in the garret. I'm sure it refers to that little space. I hope that answers some questions.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions now. So I think we'll leave that as a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So, perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. That's been really interesting. It's really nice to see it just from a different perspective. It's just so enlightening. It makes you look at the whole thing in a different way. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. We've got other comments coming in saying how great the talk was as well. So
well, that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Everybody's enjoyed it. So.
Yeah. Well, great. I've had no killer questions that I couldn't Yes.
No, it was perfect. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well,
So,
thank you.
thank you very much for everybody for attending too. So we'll leave it at that and hopefully see you at the next talk. So thank you very much. Right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.